It's just me gibbering while I'm clicking on buttons, waiting to see what happens. I could see it's broadcasting live. By the looks of it so far, there's only me watching. It's just me watching myself. Maybe if I send it out to there as well. Shared twice. Keep on clicking buttons while we wait for something to happen. Open more windows. Windows upon windows upon windows. Sorry, folks, if you are tuning in, I'm just gibbering while I'm trying to get all the windows open again to get this up and running again, because I couldn't rescue the previous broadcast. It was determined that I would not be allowed to get that room running again. I ended up having to do a full shutdown and restart and get everything opened up again. I guess most people probably won't come back now, which was entirely the purpose of why they did it just at that point. Oh, thank you for the thumbs down, Mr. Miserable. You're so miserable. You have to give me a thumbs down every time. I wonder how many years you've been doing that now. How sad is that you spent all your time doing that? That's unfortunate. Hello, Finsel. I'll see you in the chat room, mate. Getting Truth Lube back out, reach my climax. Okay. I will get back to it in one sec. I must finish what I started. I can finish what I started. Because I've got to finish saying that main bit, especially considering the fact that they went to the effort of spiking my connection to such a degree that I had to do a full shutdown and start everything back up again. That means they really didn't want me to say it, so even more so, that means I'm going to come back again and say it. And if this broadcast gets taken down as well, then that's yet more evidence onto the pile. Thank you very much. The more you try to shut somebody down, the more you just confirm what they're saying. Okay, I think that's every window is open again now and ticking over. And I'm guessing that you can hear me okay, because otherwise people would have said in the chat that no audio or whatever. So I'll just try and get back to where I was, and then these two videos can sit next to each other on the channel anyway. So if people watch the first one, I'll add a note in the comments or whatever on the first one, just to explain what happened and why it got cut off all of a sudden. Yeah, all my connection basically just stopped. And even though the router said it was okay, you know, it was showing its happy blue light and whatever, there was no connection whatsoever. Didn't matter what I tried, there was no connection there, and I couldn't get it back. Right, I know I got as far as saying take away the dragon power and all that, so you're left with the statement of the word in the tone. And again, I haven't opened my notes up again. 1 sec. Get my notes back open again. Not that there's a lot in there, but you know, they're the little cues that help me remember what I was thinking at the time that I made the notes. Yeah, the word in the tone without the dragon power. The word in the tone is that Excaliber, or the definition that gives you the Excaliber. So the difference between the ambiguous, the totally amorphous nature of the whole of everything, that ocean, that egg, that is the soul, in the way I'm using the symbolism, the soul, the womb. It's the energetic source where this rises up out of. And then the Excaliber is the culmination of that into a delineation that is, by its existence, separates itself from the whole. And I think what they were trying to convey in that legend of Arthur, and I think I said last week, I went into like just putting some seeds out for people to say, you know, go and look into this kind of stuff for yourself, of course, because there's a lot more to the legends than just the generalized simplistic stuff that we're often told about in school, or that we see on the movies or in TV shows about Camelot and Arthur and whatever. Over the years as well, I've found it more and more comedic of why in the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, why when one of them suggests, shall we go to Camelot, the others go, no, it is a silly place. No, let's not go there, it's a silly place. But those legends, I think, are, as classically in every culture, the myths and legends that are carried on through those cultures carry definite truths within them. They might be buried deep, or they're buried in a kind of subtle analogy within the myth itself. And then, of course, you've got things like astrotheology, where the movements of the planetary bodies, the solar bodies and stuff like that are disguised by talking about them as if they were beings, and they're personified as beings, anthropomorphized into archetypal beings, and then stories are told to explain those movements as if you're watching people, you know. So they use the correlation between what you understand of how you interact with the beings around you, i.e. when you're out and about doing your daily shopping, and how similar things happen up in heaven, as above so below, as below so above. And that then enables them to pass on quite complicated concepts and ideas in a way that connects to many people and make them more accessible to those people, even if they don't have the skills or the knowledge to break down the fine details of what it is they're being told, or what they're watching if it's like presented as like a play or a story. In the Arthurian legends, linking to the stuff to do with the Lady in the Lake. Who or what is the Lady in the Lake? Where is the lake? Yeah, again, this is all stuff that's much more archetypal and metaphorical. They're not referring to physical things or people. I would argue strongly that these myths and legends are not trying to tell us about a human being called Arthur who became king of the Britons. There may very well be some connected truths in the same way as they do with a lot of religions. They'll use a certain amount of truth of the times and use that as the vehicle to carry these metaphors and analogies, such that they can then be, perpetually retold because people find them entertaining and interesting, so they tell them again and again around the campfire. So that sword in the stone principle, I think, is much more about helping people realize their own power by being able to discern the definition rather than the background noise, or to separate to learn to be able to separate, to discern the difference between the acuity of the thought process and the background noise of the tone of where it comes from. So Arthur's Excaliber was not a sword that was so super duper sharp that he could chop anybody with it, and it didn't give him superpowers like He-Man's sword. It was talking about, or trying to get across, the principles that through acuity of thought process and acuity of heart intent, through acuity of words, you get such fine precision that you can see through all the noise, all the confusion, all the chaos of an uncertainty that is reality. And you can, through use of that acuity, create strong and foundational patterns that lead to things such as the formation of a nation. And we could get into arguments about what do you mean by the word nation and what does that mean to us now, and the kind of societal concepts and how those things are manipulated and used against us, with things such as like setting nations against each other to war against each other and cause death and destruction and suffering. But what Merlin was giving to Arthur was not a sword, it was the comprehension and the gnosis of how to apply his own will to those around him, such that he could create this strong backbone. The round table of the Knights of the Round Table and all that lot. He created this foundational backbone that was so effective, it led to the formation of what we would now call England, or Great Britain as a whole. So he took the chaos, and out of the chaos, that background tone, he used his own acuity, his own gnosis, and his own will to create a pattern within that chaos. And that pattern was strong enough to fend off the chaos, push back the chaos, and create something that had a lasting use or a lasting benefit to those people that lived within its borders. So like the founding of nations. I think some, and especially academics, would maybe argue that, well, yeah, that's in the story. It's the legend of Arthur, and he was the one that brought the knights together, and in doing so, he created that foundation of law and justice and chivalry that enabled them to build a nation. Yeah. And I think, yeah, that could be admitted by the general academic point of view of this kind of topic, but I think they're really missing the deeper esoteric layers that are there in the story, and they go far beyond that simplistic literal reading of the story and what it supposedly says. So this is something that, as I said earlier before I got interrupted, I've been sat on this idea for quite a while, and I've been considering it and mulling it over and looking at it from different angles, and thinking about how I could go over the idea without it becoming too seemingly ambiguous or amorphous, as if I'm just talking about magic fairy tales, because there is a whole lot more to it than just magic mythology kind of dismissive point of view that a lot of people have about these kind of mythological stories, legendary stories that are passed down to us that we still have now today. So hopefully that makes sense to you. If you can, it makes sense to the cat, she just told me. If you can get that perspective of how I'm looking at this, and look at these things in a more metaphorical way. Excaliber was not a sword. It wasn't a piece of metal sharpened on either side. I think Arthur was more likely not necessarily a real human being, or he may not have been a singular human being, but for the purposes of the story and for the purposes of nation building, it's been coalesced into this archetypal story play, similar to the Greek tragedy plays, where it conveys to the viewer, the listener, these important archetypal truths about how people work, how reality works, how you interact in that environment, and how you can influence that environment. Because from that point of, like in the classic storyline, from that point of pulling the sword from the stone, of being able to draw the sword from the stone, the people around him looked at Arthur as if he was some kind of demigod, that he had this kind of superpower, this power of the one-eyed. Again, you get into the connections to that kind of Illuminati meme and the trendified effects of that. You could also talk about Odin in that respect as well, and how it is, to a certain degree, it's a repetition of those kind of Nordic theological mythologies that, again, are passing on archetypal truths to people, disguised as fairy tales about gods and goddesses. Yeah. Astrotheology in another form, without necessarily referring to physical solar bodies or planetary bodies. They're talking about metaphysical bodies, metaphysical interactions within groups, within societal groups, within nation states, within the group mind rather than the individual's mind. Yeah, the dragon power as well is part of the reason why I've been calling it that for a number of years as well. Is connections into partly that mythology to do with the Arthurian legend, but also just the general information that's out there about Merlin, his supposed existence, the fact that he was a bard, and bards were keepers of knowledge, and the the relayers of knowledge, not just repeaters. They had to have the knowledge within themselves. They had to have the gnosis of this stuff. It wasn't as if they were just reading it from a book and then going and standing on a stage and repeating it. That wasn't really a bard. A bard was somebody that had life experience and direct experience of the things that he would be relaying to people, and he would often use artistic vehicles to pass on this information to people. So they would not necessarily say it to you in a direct fashion. They would say it to you in an analogy, in an artistic way, so that the concept could carry far more context than the simple literal definition of its contents. Merlin then connects into a lot of the stuff to do with the Druids, and you can go and learn about the Druids and the kind of mainly what's in modern sense called paganism. It's a lot more to it than that. Paganism is somewhat of a controlling and dismissive compartmentalization that's been put onto a lot of stuff in modern times. But Merlin, if he was a real being, was more likely a druid. And the connection of the Druids into the ancient history of this geographical area that's called Great Britain now, and their slow destruction at the hands of the Romans, and then the coming religions. Initially it was the Catholicism, then it was Christianity and everything else, and other stuff as well. Shall we say that word again? Because I said it several times earlier on. Satanism. To the dragon power, represented by the S, the sine wave. It's a 19th letter in the modern English language. 19th, 1 and 9 creates a whole number, but it's a whole number. It's 0 split in half. Again, the reference to that bisecting of the whole by the Excaliber, by the delineation. It's also a Kabbalistic reference to the Alpha Omega, the 1 to the 9, and not truly the Alpha Omega, because it doesn't start at the 0 and end at the 0. It is that principle of it's the next step from 1 to 9. And then go from that British cultural reference to the dragon power to the global cultural references throughout ancient cultures to an energy force that permeates our biosphere, that has come under many different labels, but is oftentimes referred to as being sentient unto itself. So you get things like the Sophia principle, the Gaia principle, ley lines, energy lines, the crystalline geometric matrix of the planet, the thought processes, the thought energy of the planet, and the spiral. The spiral is kind of like a delineation of that split circle, because it's not true, it's not bisected, it's just snipped at one edge, and then the edge is sort of pulled inwards in a symbolic sense. But all these things are trying to pass on very, very deep-seated concepts about how we think and how we interact with reality that should not be taken in the simplistic literal reading of what they are. There's a lot more layers to them. There's a lot more meanings to them when you start pushing back past that simple definition of the words that we define as English language. Define definition. Define definition. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, maybe just from that one simple explanation of look at that story again and think from a slightly different angle and try experimenting with it here and there, of doing things like remove the S, remove the dragon power. Merlin was supposed to be able to command the dragon. Is that why he confused the general public deliberately to keep them at bay from this power, to keep them away from this power, by putting the dragon there? By adding the dragon into that statement, he kept most people away from the comprehension of what he was actually trying to teach Arthur, or give to Arthur. I mean, it is more, I suppose, for me, it's been of interest to me because I live in Great Britain. I come from the British culture, and all of this stuff is, sublimated into our society in various different ways. But over the years, I found more and more connections into knowledge that is not restricted to one nation state or one geographical area. This is knowledge that seems to be global, and from the ancient past, the majority of it. Certainly the foundations of it have been known for a long time. And over that time period, different people and different groups and different nations, different tribes have re-encoded it in different ways, in different stories, using different names and different geographical locations. Meow. And different uniforms. And different cats to jump on your lap. Come on in. But the same information is repeated again and again and again. And I've often referred to it before as like the beacon. It's the beacon that keeps flashing if you bother to take notice of it. And one of those bits of evidence, I consider it to be evidence, but it's evidence on a very sort of macro scale. You have to look at the large picture to be able to see this stand out as a piece of, as a sort of saying it in a kind of singular fashion, as a piece of evidence. When you start moving closer into the picture, there are so many subparts to it that you don't see that the importance of that holistic picture of it. But that's one of the pieces of evidence that for me is something that gives me the confidence that I can say, well, yeah, I believe in something, but trying to define that something, definition, is difficult. And whenever you do start to try and define it, you get dragged down through the inversion back into various compartmentalizations of this physical experience. And whenever that starts to happen, problems increase the further you slow down into those boxes. So the more rules a religion has, the more incorrect it is. I think, yeah, that makes sense with the way I'm saying it. I hope maybe if I say it again, it will, even make sense to me. The more complicated, or the more sheer volume, number of rules that you need to have to make your religion work, the more it disproves itself. The closer you get to the top of that tree of knowledge, the less there are separate answers. It reduces, it resolves itself more and more to less and less and less. In the same way as like when you look down at the micro level. I'll have one more look at my notes, I think. So I was not far off done as well. Before they interrupted me, before the whoever they are, the Illuminati. I use that word, it's them, it's the Illuminati. They come to deluminate me. I was going to go into it, but it is knocking on a bit now. And I think I've done in total probably about at least 90 minutes, nearly 2 hours, allowing for a little gap of the interruption. And I wanted to finish what I was saying about the sword in the stone, the word in the tone, the soul Excaliber, just so that it's there permanently in case they try to interrupt it again. Reflections, and why I put the title of the, well, when I originally started the broadcast, the title is just reflect, reversed, as if you're looking at it in a mirror. So I've just written it backwards, basically, reflect. And talking about those inversions, which I did earlier on. One other thing I'll throw in just before I stop rambling at you about that duality and that Excaliber line. That in and of itself creates that kind of plank. What's the word for it? Beam, the 3-inch beam, like they do in gymnastics. When they're walking along that narrow beam. You know, when talking about these kind of psychological or esoteric concepts, you can't exactly envision how wide is this thing, because there is no width to it. There are no physical dimensions to it. You're talking about something that's metaphysical. So it's not like you can say, like, it's a 3-inch wide beam. But the principle that you are walking down a knife edge, you know, and there is that delineation of the duality between one side and the other, and all of it together creates the whole, creates the holistic. But we walk that fine line that could also be, in a sort of modern scientific terminology, be defined as an event horizon between polarities. We're constantly navigating that event horizon. And when you start getting pulled one direction or the other, that direction leads to an extreme polarity. You know, people will often talk about being positive or being negative. Well, in reality, it's not true that you are actually either. You're both at the same time, because there's positive and negative energies going on in your body in a kind of physical, chemical, biological fashion. And there's positive and negative charges going on in your electromagnetic being constantly. You know, you wouldn't be living without the two working together. And in a psychological and a spiritual sense as well, there's both going on together. They're not separate. They're not either or. You are both together. You're walking along that knife edge of Excaliber, that event horizon. When we were chatting the other night with some of the guys, I was trying to define this as the difference between the individual, the self, and the group mind, in terms of things like, as we're often talking about, corporations and governments and things like that. These are things that are not a physical entity. They only exist as conceptual entities. They're non-physical, non-corporal. They are corpus. They're non-living. But you can, if you choose to, put energy into them. And the more people and the more energy being put into them, the more powerful these things become. So think of things like the nation state, or the idea of the monarchy, the royal family, and the supposed power that they do or don't have. You know, that's that walking the event horizon between the balance between how much energy you have for yourself and how much you put into these group mind metaphysical concepts. The difference between being at the bottom of that black hole, being crushed in the density of that centralized singularity of government, or being out beyond the event horizon, being so free that you are beyond the gravitational pull of that singularity. And the difference between centralization and decentralization. And these kind of dualistic principles, and they can be applied and observed in so many different ways. And they may seem like just talk, but knowledge, gnosis of these things can be applied to how you live in a physical, experiential way. And that therein is why, for myself, for me, this is why the gravitation pulling me towards talking about a lot of this kind of stuff, about what are philosophical or spiritual concepts or principles, not necessarily talking about stuff that is, in a modern scientific sense, quantifiable, factual data that can be shown through experiential repetition, experimental repetition, I should say. But these concepts affect your thinking, and these concepts can affect your life and how you live your life. And being pulled too far one way or the other can be detrimental to your life. It can harm your well-being. It can make you unhealthy, both physically and psychologically and energetically. And when you amplify that in the group mind sense of that example, that analogy I was using of like the black hole, then what you end up with is the kind of shit like we have now, where if not all, certainly the vast majority of the governmental structures across the planet now, if you ask most people, they probably have at least something to complain about their government, or they'll be outright horrified by what their government does in their name. That's an example of how that unaware input of energy, that ignorant input of energy, can lead to the power, the powering up of a uncontrollable beast. The more you feed it, the fatter that beast gets, and its hunger never ceases. So eventually it will eat you when it can't find something else that looks tastier than you. So, if you feel that a lot of these topics may not necessarily have some kind of physical definition or reality for you, then maybe that might help explain why these kind of things are absolutely worth your consideration. Ignorance of these things leads to ignorant choices in a physical sense, so affecting what goes on up here and in here in your intent. And like classically, like I've been rambling around with the last show and this show, the whole reason why I called it that Sol Excaliber, and why I was referencing that stuff to do with like the sword in the stone and the deceptions, the misinterpretations and deliberate misdirections that are put in front of you on a constant daily, hourly basis to try and influence, to try and put their will into your head so that you then willingly choose to put your energy into their pockets. That is the game, the casino game. Okay, I'll wind it up there. I've ranted a fair bit about stuff, and hopefully I've made some sense. Oh, a film recommendation. This is just something I noted down because I thought it's worth. It was one of them films that I thought was worth. You know, if you've not seen something like this before, it might uh, have a good impact on you. Maybe if you're interested in these kind of topics, and certainly if you're interested in the extent that you are considering, or you are already maybe on the way towards doing this, if you're considering the kind of idea like a lot of people often do, where you want to go off somewhere up into the mountains or move to another country or wherever it is you're going to go and do it, and set up your own little environment where you're outside and away from the system, and you know, you're doing your own thing the way life is meant to be done, you know, the way you want it to be done. But how, even when it may seem like the most perfect, idyllic setting, and you're doing everything that you think is right and good and healthy and beneficial for you and the people you're with there, the family or whatever, there can, in and of itself, because of that, be an imbalance. It's a film called Captain Fantastic. And I first saw it a few years ago, I think not long after it first came out. But a friend recommended it to me again recently, and at first I didn't recognise the name. I didn't remember that I'd seen it before, and I thought, "Oh yeah, cool, cheers." I watched that. I watched it, and then I remembered that I'd seen it before, and then I remembered that I thought it was a good film in the first place. It was like, yeah, that's worth watching. That's worth people giving some consideration to. So it's not a super fast, exciting action drama kind of film, not at all. But there's a lot of really good concepts and information there, a lot of good perspective in there. Yeah, so if you get the chance, go and dig it up. It seems to be doing the rounds on a lot of the sites at the moment. So if you're into these kind of topics, because there is certainly a lot of sort of philosophical element to that film. Yeah, go and check it out. Worth a couple of hours. But other than that, I think Kip's going to be on again on Tuesday night. If you want to tune in, it's Tuesday night show. And then Peter and myself will be back on Wednesday night. And then it's the Friday night again for Kip's show after that. And then we'll be back to the Day of the Sun again. So I thank you very much for all listening. I hope maybe you get something of value from it, or even just entertainment. You know, entertainment's valuable as well. So thanks for listening. Thanks for giving me your time to listen and consider what I'm saying. Take care, and I'll rant at you again soon enough. And, you know, as a cheesy cliche goes, cheesy saying, be excellent to each other. We'll all go on an excellent adventure together. Don't believe the hype and keep on sailing. Thanks, folks. I'm going to click the button now to say good night. Good night from the cat as well. Take care, folks. Good night, all.